In 1968, the London Underground's Victoria Line opened. It was the first completely new tube line since 1907, and it was a success right off the bat. In fact, it was so successful that in 1989 they wanted to build another one. Let me explain. The Victoria Line was the culmination of a number of different ideas to relieve the pressure on the existing underground lines in central London. It was felt that in particular a new north-south route was needed. The Circle Line was packed with passengers who wanted to get between Victoria and King's Cross. Meanwhile, South London and North East London were badly connected with Central London. These problems had been evident well before the Second World War. London Transport and the Department of Transport wrestled with different concepts, until they finally came up with a single route that would be a distillation of all the best ideas. It would start at Walthamstow and run through the suburbs of North East London. Then it would cut across central London from King's Cross St Pancras to Victoria. Then it would head south to Brixton. Wherever possible, it would connect with other lines, both tube and conventional rail. The idea being that a significant portion of the passengers on those lines would prefer the shortcut offered by the new line. The first stage of the line opened in 1968. The line was a success, and as I'm fond of saying, if you give people a good train service, they'll use it. That's not a bad thing though, is it? I mean, you want people to use your trains, don't you? Well, yes, of course, but there was a problem. The reason the Victoria Line didn't open until 1968, despite the need for it being identified in the 1930s, was because of a shortage of money. And while London Transport's publicity trumpeted the new line as a triumph of speed and technology, the reality was that it had been built on the cheap. The stations were built as large as they needed to be, and no more. These days, stations are future-proofed in anticipation of passenger numbers rising. The Victoria Line had no such provision, and by the 1980s the stations were becoming overcrowded. In parts, the line was carrying 125% the number of passengers it was designed for. Train frequency was increased, but that in turn caused a shortage of trains. Victoria Station often found itself closed in rush hour, which totally defeats the point of the line. The Central London Rail Study of 1989 proposed a rather radical solution, which was this: build a second Victoria Line. Or rather, half of one. The idea was to duplicate part of the line between Victoria and King's Cross. That is, the section of the line that was effectively the whole reason for the line's existence. The original line was referred to in the document as Line B. The new one was Line A. But the thing is, Line A would not be an exact duplicate of Line B. It would take a much straighter path than the original. The stations would be King's Cross St Pancras, Tottenham Court Road, Piccadilly Circus, and Victoria, 4 very busy tube stations. The rest of the line would be split. The section south of Victoria to Brixton would become part of Line B. The section north of King's Cross St Pancras to Walthamstow would become part of Line A. Effectively, you'd have 2 lines operating completely separately. Preliminary studies seem to suggest that such a thing was possible. There were, however, 2 sticking points. Firstly, Line B would lose the Victoria Line depot at Northumberland Park, so a new depot would have to be built. The study suggests somewhere south of Brixton. Secondly, the line would need to be rerouted at King's Cross St Pancras. This is a fearsomely complicated station below ground and very busy. Closing it down wouldn't be an option. It is possible to reroute a line through a busy station. They did it at Bank, for instance. But it's not easy. The biggest drawback, though, was the good old cost-to-benefit analysis. The cost was estimated at £350 million in 1989 money. And the study sounds doubtful about that figure. While the duplicated Victoria Line would certainly take the heat off, well, the Victoria Line, it wouldn't do much for the rest of the network. It didn't justify the cost. And so, quite early on, the idea was tossed aside. Instead, the report suggests the Chelsea-Hackney line, a new tube line which would eventually evolve into the Crossrail 2 scheme. This has been postponed indefinitely, but it would have included a section of line between King's Cross, St Pancras and Euston, and Victoria. The report also proposes upgrading the Thameslink in a programme it calls the Thameslink Metro. This would see the light of day as Thameslink 2000 and ultimately the less exciting but less dated Thameslink programme. So the poor old Victoria line would have to struggle on. The problem remains unresolved. Some stations, such as Walthamstow Central, still have to contend with overcrowding. And I can't help but feel that if a little more had been invested in the first Victoria line, there wouldn't have been talk of a second. Well, I hope you enjoyed this duplicitous tale from the tube. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I would like once again to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your always appreciated support. You are the depot to my Brixton. And I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.